They've got more money. They got more money than they know what to do with. They got more money. They got more money than they could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. They've got more money, and all they want is more and more and more and more of it. They're addicts. They're dangerous, dangerous addicts. And this is what we're fighting against. Now, so there's that global strategic goal, which is to get Iraq back in line as an impoverished, broken country, just as they broke Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was another case. Right there in the middle of Europe, a very large country, 80% of its economy was still publicly owned, a standard of living that was still high, with an elaborate system of public services and human services. Now it's been broken up into small right-wing republics. Everything's deregulated. Everything's been privatized. Everybody is poor. They're poor now in Bosnia. They're poor now in Macedonia. They're getting poor in Montenegro and Serbia. Poor, poverty, privatize, deregulate, get them down to being the peasants. Someday, if we try and hope and pray enough, they'll be lining up to work for 15 cents an hour. And they're getting close to that already. So there's that goal of keeping that whole system of capital expropriation. It's between those who say all of that belongs to them and those of us who say all of that belongs to the people and the human communities of this planet. That's the fight between those two. There's a second reason, more immediate, particular. There's the old colonial natural resource oil reason, expropriation of a particular resource. Iraq has a reserve of 45 billion barrels of oil. At $25 US dollars a barrel, that's $1 trillion. That's a lot of money. And not a drop of that oil is owned by the Bush family or Dick Cheney or Exxon or these guys. It infuriates them. There have been French and Russian concessions made to the French and the Russians, but the U.S. wants to get in there and really grab it all and give the French and the Russians their 8% or whatever. So there's that to be considered also, direct colonial grab. There's a third reason. Just like with George I, there are very compelling issues that have been going on in the United States that have been redounding most unfavorably upon the Bush administration. Back during George I's day, it was the savings and loan scandal, a $1 trillion ripoff by people strategically placed of the public treasure, which U.S. taxpayers will be paying for generations to come. That was getting out in the national media. George I was facing the prospect of maybe 2, possibly 3 of his own sons going to jail. It all got blown right off the front page. It got blown right out of the news once he pursued that war against Iraq. And today, incredibly so, the very same thing is happening. It's the very same issues. Not the savings and loan, but it's Exxon and WorldCom and corporations that have been plundering worker pension funds, that have been plundering their own employees, that have been plundering the investor class. It's a very interesting case where capitalism is such a self-devouring beast that it can devour itself. And the state, one of the functions of the state is to advance it's a rather contradictory thing. It's an interesting thing. One of the functions of the capitalist state is to advance the opportunities for devouring and expropriation. Another function it has is to contain that and stop it sometimes when it threatens, when the parasites threaten to destroy the organism upon which they feed. Argentina is a very good example of the failure of the capitalist state to keep the most pernicious, avaricious elements of that class from devouring the entire financial social structure. People's life savings gone up and stolen from them. So you had this happening, and because it was the investor class itself that was getting victimized in the U.S., a lot of this was getting in the press, and it wasn't looking good. It wasn't looking good even personally for Bush and Cheney. Bush with his relationships with Harkins and Cheney with Halliburton, two big corporations, where the same thing was happening. Stock prices artificially pumped up so that the value of their stock could go all the way up. And then with insider trading just before the slide down, they sold it off at incredible profits and then left everybody else holding worthless paper. Both Bush and Cheney did this. Both of them lied about not knowing anything about it. There's evidence they were in on it. Of course they were. That, too, blown right out of the news, right out of the paper. Who's going to talk about George Bush, world leader, world statesman, commander-in-chief, moving to fight the demon Saddam Hussein? Who's going to start talking about Harkin now? This guy belongs in jail, and instead he's elevated himself to king of the planet. The Republican Party, which just 2 months ago was the party of big business corporate scandal, big business favoritism, seriously in trouble. The Republican Party is now the party of military strength and military leadership. So this is what we're facing here. The war against Iraq will distract from domestic problems. It justifies increased military spending. It fuels the patriotic hype. It jacks up the president's poll ratings. It diminishes, they hope, the momentum behind dissent. But, you know, it doesn't always work so perfectly.